Hello everyone. So in this video I'm just going to walk through the code that we went through in class with introducing linked lists. So the code was linkedlist.c on Moodle, and what I've done is I've taken that code and just put it into Eclipse over here, and then I have my iPad over here on the right so that I can try and illustrate what is going on in this program. Okay, so what we've defined at the top here is we've defined two structs. So our first struct here is our list element or our node. And in this case, our list is going to contain integer data, and then every linked list, every node is going to have a pointer to the next node in the list. And the idea is that we're building a chain of list elements, or a group of list elements that are going to be chained together. So that's my first struct, and I also define a pointer to that struct. Okay, there's going to be multiple of these list elements. I've also defined the list itself, and that's like I said, I was trying to think. It's hard to come up with a good word, but it's like the map or the signpost of the linked list, right? And so we only have one of these, and this particular, so for this particular list, I'm going to maintain a pointer to the head, which is the front of the list, a pointer to the tail, which is the last element in the list, and a pointer to the current, which is if I'm traversing the list. In other words, I'm going through the list, maybe I use the current to move along. Okay, before I go on with the code, I just want to show you how this might look like with a kind of complete linked list. So this would be my list, and my list has a PS head, a PS tail, and a PS current. Okay, and then I have my chain, my links of my link. These are my list elements, and notice each one of these items in the list has a data item and it has a pointer. Okay, now the last element in the list does not point to anything, so that's going to have a null pointer at the end. Okay, notice each one of these items here is representing, so let's go back, each of these nodes or list elements is represented by this struct, right? So here my list element says I have a data and a pointer, so in here my list element, that's going to be my data and that's going to be my pointer, and it's true for each one of these. For my list struct, what I have are these three things: my PS head, my PS tail, my PS current. Okay, so let's assume that we've built a list. Then what I might end up with is what we want to end up with is have the state where I have my PS head pointing to the first element in the list, or the first list element. My PS tail is always going to be pointing to the last element, and my PS current is like a temp pointer, it's a helper pointer, it's going to be pointing to some current element. Let's assume here that we started at the beginning. Okay, I'm going to just give some dummy data to my linked here, just to kind of illustrate some things that might happen with this list, right? So when I have a list that has a bunch of elements in it, I've got this, I make sure the head's pointing to the head, the tail's pointing to the tail, the current's pointing to something else. Now let's say, I'm going to write my instructions. So let's say I now want to insert a list element with 5 as the data. Oops. To the end of the list, right? So in that case, my list, I'm not going to walk through how we would do it, but then what I'm going to have is I'm going to still have my head, my tail, and my PS current. Okay, but now I have my 1 that stayed the same, my 2 stayed the same, my 3 stayed the same, my 4 stayed the same. But now if I've added a 5, then I'm going to, right, I have to create that node, and then I'm going to put the 5 here. And notice what I've had to do is I've had to change this pointer, right, at the end of 4, so there it is here, to now point to the new node instead of being a null pointer. the new node 5 is going to have a null pointer. My head is still the same, my current is still the same, but my tail is now had to point to 5 instead of 4, right? So initially my tail was pointing to 4, right? You see it here, and now I make it point to 5. Okay, so let's have another quick example. So let's say I want to insert a list element with, let's say, 0 as the data to the beginning or head of the list. Okay, so how would I do that? So then let's go ahead and redraw what that would look like. So there's my, again, PS head, my PS tail, and my PS current. Okay, and then I've got my nodes. Actually, I'm going to move these along, sorry. 1, 2, my 3, my 4, and then I have my 5, right? And so then the 5, sort of the end is still the same. What I'm doing now here is I'm adding a 0 at the front or the head of the list. So what I need to do is make that 0 now point to 1, right? Then I'm going to make my head point to that first element. My tail is staying the same, it's still pointing to 5, and my current is now going to change and point to the 0. Okay, so that's the idea, and all I did in both of these cases was insert into a linked list, but my inserting affected the front and the head and the tail, and so I had to change my pointers for head and for tail. All right, you can look for yourself what would happen if we tried to insert into the middle of a linked list. We wouldn't have to change the head or the tail, but we're going to have to change the pointer that's in the middle. Okay, but I'm not going to do that right now because I want to go back to the code and see how it might look like in practice. Okay, so this example that I just went through is just to show you how the list and list element are connected. This example has nothing to do with the code itself in terms of after we go to main. So let me create a new page and let's see what we have inside of main. Okay, and so the first thing that I do inside of main is I have a list called smylist. So I'm going to draw a similar picture to what we had before. So there's my smylist, and remember it's of type, right? So this is just like declaring a variable, just like you'd create int x. I'm creating a variable called smylist, which is of type list, and just like before, as described up in the struct, a list contains a PS head, a PS tail, and a PS current. Okay, and so if that is the case, then right now I'm just creating a list and I haven't said anything about those values. The other thing that I am creating here is I'm creating this snode1, snode2, snode3, and the type of them is a list element. Okay, so I'm going to create them randomly, but I'll move them around as necessary. Okay, so let me create them actually down here. So if I create, there's my snode1. My snode1 is of type list element, so it's going to contain data, right, over here, and it's going to contain a PS next. And I'm going to do the same for snode2, which is also going to contain data and a PS next. And I'm going to have an snode3. Oops, let's actually draw it first. So there's my snode3, which also contains my data and my PS next. Okay. All right, so again, so these two lines here, all we've done is we've declared a bunch of variables of type list, 1 of type list and 3 of type list element, and we haven't set any values. So then let's look at the next line. So line 28, it says that I'm going to set smylist, so there's my smylist. I'm going to set its current, its head, and its tail to be null. So that means that I've got these pointers, and I'm going to initialize them all to null. Okay, Now I'm going to do the same thing for these nodes, and I'm doing them one at a time. So I'm setting the data to some value and the PS next to a value. So in this case, S node 1, I'm going to set its data to be 20 and its pointer to be null. S node 2, its data is going to be 40 and its pointer is going to be null. And S node 3 is going to be 50 and its data is going to be null. Okay? Okay, so now we get to, we come to our first to do. So our first to do says we want to place S node 3, see if I can move, I can't move this thing out of the way. We want to place S node 3 into our list over here. Okay, so how might I do that is I'm going to just move it here visually just so that it can be closer, right? So I'm going to move it into the linked list. I wonder if I can shrink it a little bit. Okay, maybe I can't. Okay. Let's see. Let's make it a little bit smaller just so we can fit it in. Okay, so now I have it. I'm going to place it inside of my list over here. Okay, maybe that's way too small. Let's make it a teeny bit bigger. There we go. Okay, so all right, so now S node 3 is in here. Now if I want to put an element in the list, since this is the first element that is going in the list, right? Then all of these pointers, the head, the tail, and the current are going to point to it. And so what I'm going to be going for, I'll do this in the red, is to make the PS head point to it. I'm going to make the PS tail point to it, and I'm going to make the PS current point to it because it's the only element in my chain, in my linked list. Okay, and so in order to do that, I'm going to write the code. So go back to Eclipse. Okay, and so I'm going to say, all right, where was I? S my list. Okay, and that's a struct. So I'm going to access the element using the dot, and I'm going to say it's, let's just start with current. All right, it's going to be the same as S my list dot, and let's go with the head, and it's going to be the same as S my list dot, let's go with the tail, was the last one, and we're going to set that those values are going to point to the address of S node 3. Okay, and so what I did here is I've placed S node 3 into the list. Now, since I've placed it into the list, I really want to just refer to it with the list. So I'm actually going to remove the name of it. Okay, so we're going to, whenever we refer to this node from now on, I'm going to refer to it using the pointers that I have in my list. Okay, so that is the first to do. We have set those values. Okay, all right, I'm just trying to tidy up my pointers here. All right, so let's see what the next to do says. The next to do says we're going to place S node 1 into the list so that it is in front of S node 3. Okay, so I'm going to use my handy iPad here to, that's okay. We're going to move that over here. Let's move it a little bit here. And then, well, which one am I putting in? S node 1. So then I'm going to take S node 1. Let's resize it again so that it's a little bit smaller. And we're going to go ahead and we're going to put it in front, right? That's what I said. We're going to go in front. Just delete these a minute. I'll redraw these just in a second. But what we want to do is we want to have this node go in front, and let's go back and just redraw these pointers. So the pointers that we had before is all of the pointers were pointing over here at this S node 3, right? So that's what we have. So we have S node 3 that had all of these pointers, and I'm taking this element over here and inserting it at the front of, we want to insert it at the front, okay? So to insert S node 1 into the list that is in front, okay, I need to also make these adjustments, right? And I actually wrote them down very clearly here, step by step. I'm going to just do them for you. We want to, I'll do it again in red. If it wants to be in the front and we have a chain of these nodes, we want to make this node point to the previous node, right? So we want S node 1 to point to whatever was in the list before. And then we also will need to change my head, because now my head is this one. We've added it into the front of the list, so that's going to change my head. I'm not going to change my tail, but I need to change my current so that my current points to that node over here. Okay, so that's the picture that I'm going for. And so now we have to make sure that we do that in code. And remember, notice I'm not referring this to S node, whatever it was before. Okay, we're just going to use the links that we have. So the first step that we're going to do is let's take our S node 1 and make it point to whatever was already in the list. And then we can change our head and our current. And honestly, it doesn't matter which order we do those in. Okay, and so let's write the code to do that. So the first thing we said is that S node 1, which is a struct, it's not a pointer, so I can use the dot, and I'm going to say its PS next, right, is going to be the same as whatever PS head, PS tail, or PS current was pointing to. Since we know we're trying to go to the front of the list, we'll say the front of the list, we'll use PS head, right? So it's going to be S my list, right, dot PS head. So whatever PS head is currently pointing to, that's what we want our PS next to point to. So it's just going to be smylist.ps head. Then what we're going to do, right, so we've done step number 1 that you can see there on the right. Step number 2 is now to make our head, so smylist.ps head is now going to be pointing to the address of this new node, which is called S node 1. Okay. And then finally, I also need to make my smylist.ps current point to the address of S node 1, right? Or actually, we'll just make it the same as PS head. So I can just say smylist.ps head. Both of those are fine. Okay. All right. So that was our second to do, where I did all of these 3 steps. I'm just going to tidy up my my pointers over here, right? So I'm just going to erase these things here. So now we know we've got a good picture. I'm going to erase my 1, 2, 3. Actually, I'm just going to fix these and make them in blue, just to tidy it up a little bit. And even tidy this up a little bit. So again, I haven't changed the picture. I'm just making it easier to read. So that's pointing here. PS head is pointing to that first element, and PS current is also pointing to that. Oops. And I'm going to get rid of the name, because really we are referring to these links as part of the linked list now. These list elements are these nodes as part of the linked list. Okay. Okay, I'm going to do one more, which is where we're going to place S node 2 into the list so that it is at the end of the list. Okay, so let's bring S node 2. Okay, actually I'm going to do the same thing I did before. I'm going to resize it a little bit. Okay, we're going to put it at the end, and I'm just going to adjust this a little bit. So rather than move all the pointers, I'm just going to kind of move it so that it's like that. Okay, so we're going to insert it right here. There we go. And I'll just move this one down a little bit. Okay, so we're inserting S node 2 at the end of the list. Okay, so the picture that we now want, if we want S node 2 at the end of the list, is we want to change this pointer here to point to that element. Okay, so I write that. Right, so that's one of the first things we want to do. And once we've done that, since we're inserting at the end, it actually is a pretty straightforward. in that then the only other thing I really need to do is to make the tail point to that last element as well. Okay, step number 2. And I don't believe I need to do anything else because PS current is going to stay at the front of the list. PS head should also point to the first node in the list, and PS tail should also point to the last node in the list. Okay, and so in this case, the code that I'm going to look at is going to be, all right, so what did I do? I made the current PS tail s my list, which is a struct, and we're going to say PS tail, right, is now going to point to, sorry, no, I dot PS tail dot, no, arrow, yep, it's helping me out here, dot PS next. So that tail dot PS next, so in other words, that node's PS next, we want to make that point to the address of the new node that I'm putting in here, which is S node 2. Okay, let's just be consistent. Okay, so that's the first step. And then the second step that I did, it's like, all right, now I need to make the new tail s my list dot PS tail, right, is actually now going to be whatever S node 2 is, or the address of S node 2. So I could say the address of S node 2, or I can say it is the same as what I had before, which was S my list dot PS tail PS next. Yeah, and that's it. So it's going to point to, so either one, right? I can use the address of S node 2, I could use the one on the right, since, or the one on the left, since they're the same thing. And so what that will do is that is going to just do step number 1, which is make this pointer change, and then do step number 2, which is make the second pointer change. And so again, let's just tidy this up a little bit. I'll get rid of the 1, the 2, and then get rid of, just fix these pointers so that they're not so messy. And so I'm going to say this is now pointing here, and tail is now pointing here. Okay? Okay, so let's do one more. Let's do the printing, okay? So to do the printing, so this is the picture that we have. So I now have a list that has 3 elements inside of it. I know the head and the current are pointing to the first element, and then I'm going to loop through until I get to the tail, right? And so the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to use PS current as my helper. And so I'm going to say PS current is going to start up at head. And then what I'm going to say, while PS current does not equal the PS tail, then I'm going to go ahead and print F the data as we go. Okay. And so let me just type that up. That's right. We're going to traverse the list. Let's assume, I'm going to make an assumption here that smylist.ps current is pointing to PS head. We know it is because we've hard coded it here. Okay, when you do your assignment, you'll see that there's some assumptions you can't quite make. But for now, let's assume that it is pointing to the front of the list. And so then what I'm going to do is let's just do a while loop. So while, and we'll say smylist.ps current. Okay, so while smylist.ps current does not equal, we could say null, or we could say ps, let's see, we can say while smylist.ps current, let's say does not equal null. We're just going to loop, sorry, well, does not equal, yeah, null. So while the current does not equal null, okay, then what we're going to do is we're going to print F, and I think I said do it 1 per line, just having a quick here, yep, so integer per line, so we'll do a -n, and what we actually need to print here is going to be smylist.ps current arrow, arrow, and it's going to be the data. So that's going to be my integer. So I'm going to print that out. And then what I need to do is change what PS current is pointing to. So I'm moving the current along. And so smylist.ps current is going to be set to, or gets the value of smylist.ps current dot arrow, yep, PS next, right? So it's going to loop through. It moves the PS current along, right? So going through this code, because I'm making sure PS current is never null, I can use it correctly down here. So I'm saying, well, current is not null, right? And if I look here, PS current is not null. First step I'm going to do is printf the data. So I'm going to print out the 20, okay? Then the next line, on line 60, I'm going to say this current is now going to be whatever the current.psNext is pointing to, which is this the next element in the list. And so it's going to go ahead and move the current along, okay? And then it was trying to help me. Okay, and then it's going to do a check, right? And we go back to the top of the loop and we check and make sure that current is not null. And if it's not null, we're going to go ahead and print the data. And then the next item says we're going to move our PS current to go to whatever PS current.psNext is pointing to. So it's going to move my PS current along to here. Okay, PS current is still not null, so it's going to go ahead and print it. And then we're going to move our PS current and make PS current point to whatever the PS next is pointing to, which in this case is null. And so since PS current is null, we're going to exit the program. Okay, and I guess that is how it works. Okay, now why don't we just test it very quickly. So I'm going to right click and build my project. Okay, so I've got no errors or warnings, and let's go ahead and run it as a local C++ application. And as you can see, it did output 20, 50, 40, which it went through the list and output the numbers correctly. Okay, so that is, again, just a repeat, a reminder of how this example of linked lists work. Let me know if you have any questions.